Hi, I'm Kaya.
And I'm Joanna.
And this is Starlit Citadel Reviews.
Biblios is a medieval-themed set collection game with an auction twist from Steve Finn and ELO.
In Biblios, players are medieval abbots competing to build the best libraries by collecting rare books, labor, and materials. It's playable by 2 to 4 players in about half an hour.
Players begin Biblios by placing the scriptorium in the center of the table and putting each die, set to 3, in its slot. Now each die represents a card category: monks, pigments, holy books, manuscripts, and forbidden tomes. They discard a number of cards determined by the number of players from the deck, shuffle the remainder, and make a draw pile. Then the game begins.
Biblios is played over 2 phases, the gift phase and the auction phase. The starting player begins the gift phase by allocating a number of cards equal to the number of players plus 1 to 3 spaces on the table.
1 card goes into their hand, and 1 card goes face down into an auction pile. The remaining cards are placed face up in a public space near the scriptorium. The cards must be drawn and allocated one at a time, and they can be allocated to any space in any order.
Starting with the player to the active player's left, each player draws one of the cards from the public area into their hand. This happens until the public space is empty. Then the active player passes the draw deck to the player to his left, and that player allocates a new set of cards. This process continues until the draw deck is empty.
Now, if a church card is acquired, either by being allocated to your own hand, picked up from the public area, or won in an auction, it must be played immediately. The player it belongs to can increase or decrease the value of the number of dice shown in the card's upper right according to the plus or minus values on the card's upper left.
In the auction phase, the auction pile is shuffled and the active player reveals the top card. Starting with the player on their left, players can bid on the card or pass. Once all but 1 player has passed, that player wins the auction, pays their bid, and collects their card.
Players bid for non-gold cards using gold, and a bid is paid by discarding gold cards with a value equal to your bid. Gold cards are paid for by discarding cards of any type, and these are discarded face down. If a player cannot pay their bid, then all of the other players get to take a random card from their hand, and the card they bid on is re-auctioned without them participating.
Players take turns being the active player and auctioning cards until the auction pile runs out. Then they tally the total value of their cards in each category. The player with the highest score in each category collects its die from the scriptorium and earns the number of victory points it shows. Ties within a category are broken in favor of the player who has a card with the letter closest to A in its lower right. The player with the highest score after all categories are tallied wins. A tie is broken in favor of the player with the most gold.
So the thing that first caught my eye about Biblios was the theme. Now, medieval-themed games are a dime a dozen, but they do tend to be about either medieval combat, chivalry, or, city building and mercantilism. I've never seen a game about medieval book culture, and I found that pretty exciting. I used to study medieval literature. I still absolutely love medieval manuscripts. I think they're absolute treasures. So when I saw that this game had a scriptorium, I was really intrigued. Now, like in a lot of Euro games, this theme is pretty pasted on. It doesn't really feel like it makes its way deep into the mechanics, but it is captured really quite beautifully in the art. The quality of the art is beautiful. It's got some really nice detail work, and I think the images that are used are really evocative of the particular theme it's chosen. So I did want to point that out because it is something that is unique and executed pretty well for this genre of game. The other thing that I found intriguing about Biblios was the way that it handles information management in that first gift phase. It's a fairly standard twist on card drafting, the allocation system, but because you're allocating cards one by one out of a group and you don't know what card is going to come up next, it incorporates an element of pushing your luck that I think is really interesting. You know, you might find like a 2 that seems like it's a pretty good card in its set, but there might be something better coming, so maybe you should just toss it in the public pile. Of course, if you do that and the next one is worse, you've just handed off a superior card to another player. So it does create an interesting element of interaction. It does make for some very interesting strategy, especially because the fact that both the hand and the auction pile are face down or private means that the other players also don't know all that much about the cards that you've seen. I think the information management is really interesting, and it adds a lot of depth to what would otherwise be a fairly straightforward kind of drafting round. Now, that being said, despite the theme and despite the uniqueness of that mechanic, I think I like the idea of Biblios more than I like the actual execution. This feels like the first half or even the first third of a larger and more interesting game. Both the gift phase and the auction phase are very quick. Especially once players get to know the game a little bit, you can just kind of blast through them. And they both feel like they're preparatory in some fashion. I mean, the gift phase really is preparatory. It's setting you up for what you're then going to do in the auction phase. But the auction doesn't have a sense of finality to it. So when you do get to the end of the game, the impression, or at least the impression that I and my gaming group had was, wait, that's it? No, I got these cards and now I count them and that's over. The pacing of this game is weird. It feels like it's ramping up to a payoff that never actually materializes, and it can be disappointing. This is a game that I think had a lot of promise, but didn't quite deliver on what I would have liked to see.
So another thing you have to be aware of in this game is the fact that if you're a good card counter, you're going to have a significant advantage here. So if you're not particularly good at that, or if you don't have a very strong memory, or you can't really keep track of the cards that have been played or that you've seen, then you might be at a disadvantage. I think that probably success depends quite a bit here on how good you are at remembering exactly what you've seen. This game is very unique, I gotta say. The two phases vary widely in their strategy. What you've got to do in the first phase and the gift phase is quite different from what you do in the auction phase, but they do tie together really well. So the gift phase, you're definitely preparing for the next phase. You're setting yourself up. You're planning your strategy for what's to come. And that's really cool that you've got this really asymmetrical game that's got these two very different strategies that are fitting together really nicely. And that's very unique. This game is very simple. It's very quick, it's quick to learn, it's quick to play. It's the kind of game that you might bring to a convention or on a trip, or you might play before or after your main game on your gaming night. I would consider this a filler game. Now, unfortunately, there are a lot of filler games out there, and there are a lot of filler games that I think I would reach for before this one, just because of a few of the negatives that come along with it. You expect a lot more out of this game than you get, at least I did. And I think that it's in a realm with a lot of competition here. So if you're intrigued by the theme, which is very unique, and if you're intrigued by the gameplay, which is also very unique, I say give this game a try. And if nothing else, you get to enjoy a bunch of beautiful art in a theme that really isn't explored all that much.
Omnia sonat manius in Latin.